Media's quiet, but the audience is strong as Iran is working to undercut President Trump in the presidential election.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Logan Sekulow.
Welcome to Sekulow. We got a packed show today. I want to make sure if you are watching live right now on YouTube or Rumble or any of our video platforms, did you get involved and engaged as well? If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate it. Get your comments in as well. We are talking about a topic that we brought up yesterday, and that was, Will, I'm going to give you a little brief background on the topic if people missed it. But then the fact that we saw our numbers grow. People want to hear about this story. But of course, if you flip on your major 24-hour cable news networks, they're simply just not talking about it.
That's right. So a report came out of the Wall Street Journal that said Iran is working to undercut Trump in presidential election, U.S. spy agencies say. They say that they've observed Tehran working to influence the presidential election, probably because Iranian leaders want to avoid increased tensions with the U.S., an official with the Office of Director of National Intelligence said during a press briefing. So we've been talking about this, and we saw people very interested in it. But one of the biggest problems with this story is that it's not everywhere. Yeah, at this point, you'd think with how much the Russia hoax was rammed on everyone that this would be something hitting wall-to-wall coverage.
This is a confirmed report from our own intelligence.
That's right. And so as we did more digging, as we went with the reporting from the Wall Street Journal, later in the day we saw that CNN and Washington Post had very similar reporting, but once again, not wall-to-wall coverage like you'd expect on a story this big. But this is the document from the ODNI. That's an unclassified document, and it talks about the tactics of foreign interference in the election. Talks about foreign actors continue to rely on witting and unwitting Americans to seed, promote, and add credibility to narratives that serve the foreign actors' interests. These foreign actors seek to take advantage of these Americans to spread messaging through their channels and engagements. And there's other issues at play here, and we'll get into that in the next segment. But it talks about Iran continuing efforts to fuel distrust in U.S. political institutions and their propaganda mills and online personas, a vast web of them, to spread disinformation and have notably been active in exacerbating tensions over the Israel-Gaza conflict.
We saw our numbers spike because people said, what is this? What are they talking about? I've never heard about this, which means, by the way, there's some smart people who work at these networks. They know what their audience wants to see. We do too. And guess what? We knew this was a topic that you would want to see. But for some reason, the mainstream media decided you don't need to see this. You don't need to be confronted with this truth. And that is why it's so important for us to be on YouTube, to be on Rumble, to be over 400,000 strong on YouTube, to be over 200,000 strong on Rumble, millions on Facebook, to make sure we are active on X, on all platforms, to make sure voices like ours, which, by the way, represent you more than most mainstream media ever will. We have to make sure we're there. So I encourage you right now. There's two options here. If you're brand new or you just haven't engaged in the way you feel like you could, I'm going to ask you to subscribe if you're watching on one of those video platforms. You're on YouTube or Rumble. Be a part of this community. We do this show each and every day, Monday to Friday, from noon to 1 Eastern, but we post content continually all day long. Be a part of it. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that thumbs up or that like button if you are watching right now. And I'm going to ask you in the comments to always tell me where you're coming in from. So if you got no comment, you don't know what to say, I know sometimes it can be awkward. We want to make sure your voice is heard. We want to make sure we're also knowing where people are interacting from. So just put in, hey, Logan, I'm watching from wherever it is, Atlanta, Georgia. Let us know where you're watching. We appreciate that. As always, if you can support the work of the ACLJ, go to aclj.org, because not only just getting more eyeballs on this, we have to be able to produce this content. We can't do that without you. So right now, keep us in the fight. Be a part of the conversation. Be a part of our media influence. Get the stories that matter to you on the front page, if you will, of people's social media platforms. We can't do that without you. So go to aclj.org. And again, if you're brand new or you haven't yet, just hit that subscribe button or that follow button. Be a part of this broadcast each and every day. We'll be right back.
U.S. intel agencies warning that Iran is trying to influence our election to keep Trump from winning.
The concerning revelation comes after a stormy few weeks in the United States politics, which saw an assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden exit the race.
Quote, the IC has observed Tehran working to influence the presidential election, probably because Iranian leaders want to avoid an outcome they perceive would increase the tensions with the U.S. Tehran relies on vast webs of online personas and propaganda mills to spread disinformation and have been notably active in exacerbating tensions over the Israel-Gaza conflict.
The Office of the Director of National Intelligence has warned Americans that whatever content they consume on social media could be foreign propaganda coming from fellow Americans.
Iran has played a role in our information space since the war in Gaza began, an increased role, where they have been seeking to put out lines in favor of Hamas and have even been reportedly, according to the Director of National Intelligence, funding some of the protests that were taking place in the United States and seeking to sow division in our country.
The intelligence report warns that Iran is trying to influence the election by undermining Donald Trump's candidacy. This stems from the former president ending the Iran nuclear deal with Tehran, reimposing sanctions and ordering the killing of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani.
The Iranians aren't just interested in the public relations and propaganda and disinformation. They're also a terrorist state, and they are seeking to launch terrorist attacks worldwide, and certainly I wouldn't put it past them in the United States. Remember that it was during the Trump administration that we took out Iran's IRGC, Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps commander Qasem Soleimani in January of 2020, and there's no doubt that the Iranians would like to get revenge for that.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We're taking your comments. I see them coming in. I encourage you right now. We haven't done this in a while, a little bit. Well, obviously people putting in where they're watching from and all of that. And look, if the media, you may remember a few months ago, Governor Hochul of New York said any clowns that show up to these Trump rallies, of course, this was pre-assassination attempt, Trump rallies, they're just a bunch of clowns that are showing up in our state. Our state will never support this. And this situation happens, and all of a sudden you guys started putting up the clown emojis. It was very fun. We haven't done it in a while, but I'm going to encourage you right now. You know what? I think it's time, because you look at what this is, which is really just media distraction, telling you, or really not focusing on the truth that's happening right now. Again, these are confirmed reports. And you may have a problem with some of these confirmed reports. You may have a problem with the way Russia was set up last time. But as Will said, Russia was everywhere. And I encourage you, by the way, I encourage everyone to make sure that you're being careful on social media. When you're in a Facebook group, maybe look who the origin is, look what the admins are, see if they're real people, even know who you're commenting back and forth with. Sometimes it's bots, sometimes it's people in Iran, or people who are paid for by organizations that are paid for by those kind of governments.
That's right. And there's a couple other highlights I want to point to this Office of Director of National Intelligence briefing that was put out. And they were doing this as, we're now under 100 days from the election. So they were kind of their 100 days till election briefing on foreign influence. But one thing that's also in this report is they highlight three main foreign powers whose influencing could play into the election. And they are Russia, China, and Iran. We've been talking about the Iran one, mainly because it's so interesting to see the glaring hole in the coverage of Iran trying to harm a specific candidate. And that's what they're talking about. They're talking about Iran specifically trying to harm the candidacy of Donald Trump. But you also see a blurb on Russia, and they say that Russia remains the predominant threat to the U.S. elections. Moscow continues to use a broad stable of influence actors and tactics and is working to better hide its hand, enhance its reach, and create content that resonates more with U.S. audiences. Then wait, one more here.
I like that last sentence because it's like that is the most influencer content creator thing. We're just making content to try to resonate more with our audience.
They're watching YouTube videos on how to get a little bit better, see what you want.
I've said that sentence, and I don't run a government, but I've said that when we're like, what top work are we going to do? Well, we want to make sure our content resonates more with our viewers. And that is part of content creation. It's part of this. But when essentially the BRICS nations are now creating that content and influencing, like I said, in different ways, because it still could be Russia. But we know these are all kind of one and the same.
Well, and it says these actors are seeking to back a presidential candidate, in addition to influencing congressional elections, undermine the public confidence in the electoral process, and exacerbate socio-political divisions. Here's the problem.
I use those words less.
Yeah, 100% true.
The content creation I'd use, but that part I don't say quite as much. But it is that moment where you have to be very clear-headed on what you're looking at and who you're influenced by.
Well, and here's the bigger problem, though, is that they're still going to push this Russia narrative. And don't be surprised if you start to see the left-leaning outlets start to pick up on this one more and try to push it again, especially if the polling starts to trend against them again. Oh, looks like Russia's up to their old tricks. Is there more collusion? And we hear that narrative again. But here's the problem with this. One, Putin publicly said that he prefers Biden to Trump because Biden was predictable.
Now that Biden's gone, scared of him. Yeah.
As Rick has said, Kamala Harris, much more predictable than Biden. But at the end of the day, you saw yesterday a sweetheart deal for Russia, a prisoner swap. We got Americans back, but they got aggressive criminals, hitmen. Rick talked about that as well, about the man that assassinated someone in Germany that was a operative from Russia. That is one of the people, just a mile away from the U.S. Embassy where Rick was stationed when this happened. That is one of the people that Russia got back. If the Russians truly wanted Donald Trump back in the White House, why would they not have waited on this deal? Why would they care to give a PR national security win to the Biden-Harris administration while Kamala Harris is trying to strengthen her international chops? That is why she had that meeting with Bibi Netanyahu. It is why she has been out there giving foreign policy speeches. And now they have another thing to put on their resume of look at what we accomplished less than 100 days from an election. If this were true, because I do question some of the intelligence from our intelligence agencies when they point to this and keep saying, here's the narrative, here's the line, we're doing it again, when at the end of the day, the Russians are making sweetheart deals with the Biden administration. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't pass the smell test. This is, once again, what they are going to put out there. And they say it is the most predominant threat to U.S. elections, but they're going to probably, especially in the media, hide the Iran threat, which makes a lot of sense. You understand. Yeah, they have an assassination bounty out on President Trump, on Secretary Mike Pompeo, because of the assassination of Soleimani. They made things a lot tougher for the Iranians to fund their proxy terror wars during that administration. Of course they don't want him back. Now that they're flush with cash because the Biden administration pulled back on sanctions, tried to get in that terrible nuclear deal again, they are able to run these operations. They can spend this money to have a vast web of online personas and propaganda mills to spread disinformation. That wouldn't have happened under the Trump administration because they were broke.
Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't happen. The hostage dealings wouldn't happen. These are nervous countries seeing what's happening right now and trying to figure out, play some of their old hits. Getting involved in these elections, getting involved in a way that honestly the American people need to keep their eyes very open. I think this is incredibly important. You may have a liberal friend in your life, as a lot of us do, and they start spewing some of these talking points, and then you realize, oh, they're all have the same talking point. Like I said, we said the Olympics over the weekend. All of a sudden, it went from it wasn't the Last Supper. It was everyone knows you Christians. Everyone knows that.
Everyone's real versed on Dionysus.
On the Dionysus, on the Feast of Dionysus. Everyone knows this. Of course. How could you take that Smurf person and not think that this was, something we all know? No, of course. Those become talking points. And where do those come from? Now, I don't know about that one specifically, But there's a reason they all take fire and they get spread, and that is because they are not only gaslighting you, they are coming up with narratives that break the conservative Christian point of view, and then have people start questioning it. And the problem is you see too many people who buy into it. It's not even just liberals. It's people who just want to buy into what they see on social media, and they can trust it because some random friend said that it was the Feast of Dionysus. Some random friend said this was Russia propaganda. Then all of a sudden it starts spinning. It starts spinning. They get involved in moms groups on social media. They get involved in the mainstream media for some reason has decided, I think we can jump to some conclusions, and I never said this. If you think you know the conclusion, send in the clowns. We don't have any clown emojis going right now. I forgot to say it. Send in those clowns as we head to this second part of the show, because this is an important time. These kind of broadcasts, each and every day. The reason we do this show, we are not ad supported. We are supported only by people like you who know your voice needs to get out there, and we're not doing it behind a paywall. Okay, there's a lot of great conservative outlets out there, a lot of great outlets that are spreading a lot of interesting information. I think they have some very intelligent hosts, but a lot of them are doing it behind a paywall. You got to spend whatever for your subscription, and then you're back behind there. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it can become an echo chamber. What we're proud of is we're 400,000 plus strong on YouTube. We're 200,000 plus strong on Rumble. We're influencing culture. You want to know how your kids are getting their news? My son was talking to me yesterday about the BRICS nations. Okay? He's 11. Why does he know about this? It's not from his school, great school, but it's not from the school. It is from YouTube. So we have to make sure we are there and that we can reach an audience. So I encourage you, it always does really well for us. Not only do you want to support the work of the ACLJ by making your donation, and donations are doubled right now during our Life and Liberty drive for August. And we got some great stuff coming up next week. Yeah, we're giving you a little bit of a breather for that because I know we hit you hard for the last few days, but it's still open. You can still be a part of the Life and Liberty drive right now at aclj.org. And you can still help. If you didn't see the broadcast, we talked about that woman in Egypt who was a Christian who has been essentially kidnapped and forced to convert to Islam. And now we are doing our best to work with the UN and to present the UN our plan to help rescue her. We're doing all that over at aclj.org. But you can be a part of that conversation too. And there's simple ways to do it. Obviously, you can make a donation. That's greatly appreciated. But if you're brand new, or maybe you haven't done it yet, subscribe. If you've already subscribed, like. If you've already liked this video and subscribed, comment right now. Put in a comment if you're watching on one of the outlets that provides that, a Rumble or a YouTube. And that comment can be telling me where you're coming from. You can send in a clown emoji, as a lot of you love to do, which I always think is very fun. Or you can just simply make your comments heard. Someone on our team, by the way, is reading. If it's not me, which I try to scroll through as many as I can, if it's not me, though, we have members of our team monitoring the comments because we make a broadcast like they said. We are creating content to, what was it?
Yeah, 100%. You are, use the networks of U.S. Western personalities to create and disseminate a friendly narrative.
It was like content that creates influence. Your content is more appropriate
its
for our
reach
audience.
And create content that resonates more with U.S. audiences.
That's what we're trying to do each and every day. So subscribe, send in those clowns. We'll be right back.
This morning, Iran staging a mass funeral for Hamas's political chief. The Iranian regime says Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated by Israel, killed by a missile strike on this building in the heart of its capital city, just hours after meeting Iran's supreme leader.
Leading the prayers, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who has promised a harsh punishment for the murder of a guest in his country.
Calls of mourning mixing with cries for revenge against Israel and death to America.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel is prepared for any retaliation.
There are challenging days ahead of us. Since the attack in Beirut, threats have been heard from all sides. We are prepared for any scenario and will stand united and determined against any threat. Israel will exact a heavy price from any aggression against us on any front.
A potential repeat of this massive missile barrage Iran fired back in April.
If Israel is attacked, we certainly will help defend Israel. You saw us do that in April. You can expect to see us do that again.
Israel is bracing for retaliation on multiple fronts tonight, and now the State Department issuing a stark new warning to U.S. citizens: get out of South Lebanon because new fighting may be about to erupt.
The UN Security Council held an emergency meeting today to discuss the strikes overnight. This gathering came at Iran's request.
Iran is likely to respond, but I think it's going to be probably a lot more muted than it was in April when it responded to those large number of killings of IRGC generals and senior leadership in Syria earlier this year. Again, Iran operates its influence through its IRGC through the region, and you sever that, they lose a lot of power and influence, and that's actually what's at stake with these leaders being taken off the board.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We're joined by Rick Ronell. I couldn't think of someone more important to have on this broadcast as we are monitoring, and President Biden just spoke about this, I guess you'd say, historic hostage swap between Russia and the United States during a very uncertain time with our relationship with Russia. And of course, this has some pretty big ramifications. And of course, the conversation has come to, Rick, well, what was the swap? Obviously, we're happy the Americans were freed. We always want to see that, and specifically these two who have been imprisoned for quite some time. But who are we swapping it for? What does the deal end up being? And I just saw a tweet from you that really, or ex post that really expands upon this. And it's a pretty rough situation.
Yeah, look, I think we've got to understand that we've got different issues going on here. The families of individuals who are held against their will, who are hostages or prisoners, they have a keen focus on getting their loved ones back. They shouldn't coordinate with the government. They shouldn't think about the precedent or the slippery slope that it sets. They need to be focused on getting their loved ones back. We get that. We understand that they have a very sincere desire to get their loved ones back. But public policy officials have to think about something else. They have to think about the slippery slope and the precedent that is set by raising the price on Americans just simply for hostile governments to get terrorists back home. And so that's where my concern here is. I have helped individuals, families from outside the government negotiate to get their loved ones home. And that's one hat that you wear, and you don't think about the precedent. You just literally try to get them home. But when I've been a government official, and it's my responsibility to make sure that we don't have a slippery slope, you can't do these exchanges. They're not a good idea. There's an individual that I just highlighted on X that when I was U.S. ambassador to Germany, this terrorist, this Russian terrorist, drove his bike in the Tiergarten, which is a park in Berlin right next to the U.S. embassy, in the middle of daylight, shot a Chechen and kept going through the bike in the bushes, and eventually was caught by the Germans. It took a while. We had to really push the Germans to show them that this was a Russian plot. They arrested the guy. They put him in prison. And the White House has been leaning on the Germans the last several weeks to release this individual, this terrorist, this guy who murdered somebody in the middle of Berlin in broad daylight. The Germans have now released him. He's gone back to Putin and back home to Russia. He's one of the people and the top person that was just exchanged for very innocent Americans, a couple of journalists and some others. Now, again, the families, of course, are ecstatic, but I'm very concerned about the precedent that this sends. Americans overseas now, the price just went up on their head.
Pressure that the Biden campaign and well, not campaign anymore, but the Biden administration has said that they have put on the Russians for the war in Ukraine. And then you look at a deal like this where they get to celebrate that we brought Americans home right at the beginning of a Harris campaign to help build that resume for her as she seeks to be the next president. But also it looks like a sweetheart deal for the Russians, for Putin. How are they going to square this, that they are the toughest on Putin and that he's not going to be able to get away with everything he gets away with when they're letting terrorist hitmen be exchanged and giving a gift to Putin at a time where they're trying to say they're strong on him, but also Putin favors Trump. So, Russia, but we're going to also have a great foreign policy win right here. Why would Russia, if they wanted Trump to win, why would they even agree to this?
Well, let's remember that Putin wanted Joe Biden because he was predictable. And someone who's more predictable is Kamala Harris. And so this gift from Vladimir Putin to the Biden-Harris administration and the Harris campaign is very clear. It is a clear indication that Vladimir Putin wants Kamala Harris because she's weaker and she's an easier opponent. So they're giving this gift in the middle of the campaign because it looks like the weak candidates, Biden and Kamala, are going to just celebrate this and not think about the slippery slope. Putin is laughing all the way. He got the Germans and the Americans to do exactly what he wanted. And do you not think that Vladimir Putin is going to be looking for new Americans to put into the reserve so that he can get others? Of course he is. This is why we are less safe. And I've heard from journalists for the last 8 years that somehow Vladimir Putin was interfering in our elections and they were distraught about it. Well, look what just happened today. Vladimir Putin is interfering in our elections and literally celebrating this gift that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris signed off on and just gave him. And I think it's really a signal of weakness, and that's not what we need from America.
The president tweeted, "I will not stop working until every American wrongfully detained or held hostage around the world is reunited with their family." When you couple that with the soundbite that we just heard, talking about questioning whether allies matter, they do matter. How do you think the Israelis feel right now when he's making speeches about you have to treat your allies right and they really matter, and also that we won't stop working until hostages are home, when we know that there are American hostages being held by Hamas right now?
Well, I don't want to see any hostage swaps. I don't want to see any hostages taken. And this is the world that we're living in, which is why you need leaders like Donald Trump who actually go in and utilize the other parts of the U.S. government, the other tools, sanctions, Syria sanctions, isolation, tariffs. All of those issues are how Donald Trump would get individuals returned home without doing the ridiculous swap. So you take Pastor Brunson, for instance, who was held against his will in Turkey. Donald Trump said to President Erdogan, "I'm going to ruin your economy tomorrow if you don't release Pastor Brunson." They released Pastor Brunson because they believed that Donald Trump was going to do something to their economy. And so that's the type of negotiations that we need. Somebody who doesn't just look into the prisons and say, who can we swap? It's such a terrible, easy way to do a prisoner swap, but it makes us less safe.
Certainly, the moments I miss of President Trump were moments where I think he's even been quoted as saying, it's like, don't be crazy, but give them the potential to think you may be, that you may do something that could destroy their country to save one person, to save one American. And we saw that happen firsthand. Rick did, and the ACLJ team did as well with Pastor Brunson. And of course, they did ask Joe Biden, did he speak to Vladimir Putin? To which he replied, "I don't need to speak with Putin." So there you go. Done. I don't need to. It's fine. At this point, I'm a lame duck president. What does it matter? Give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-684-3110 as we head into this next segment. Like I said, we're also in this process right now as we are urging the UN to help save and rescue Irene, a Christian woman who was in the middle of her medical school, exams, was captured. And we're a part of it right now to try to get her back. Again, this is in Egypt that's happening right now. And all of this is happening around the world. And I brought it up earlier that this is not some sort of right-wing propaganda. Look what happened in Rick's neck of the woods in San Diego just this past weekend. We're going to discuss that coming up. Give us a call, 1-800-684-3110.
Some people think champions are bored, that it's a title that requires something only a handful can ever possess.
There are times in our lives that we are called, every one of us, to step up and serve a cause greater than ourselves.
even when the loudest voices in the room say it's wrong. That it can't be done. It can be a difficult stand, but it's one any of us can make, including you.
You can be the change. You can make that difference.
You can be a champion. We cannot do what we do without you.
By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life.
A champion of liberty, a champion of freedom.
Please join us. Become an ACLJ champion today.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Logan Sekulow.
Welcome to Sekulow. We got a packed show today. I want to make sure if you are watching live right now on YouTube or Rumble or any of our video platforms, did you get involved and engaged as well? If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate it. Get your comments in as well. We are talking about a topic that we brought up yesterday, and that was, Will, I'm going to give you a little brief background on the topic if people missed it. But then the fact that we saw our numbers grow. People want to hear about this story, but of course, if you flip on your major 24-hour cable news networks, they're simply just not talking about it.
That's right. So a report came out of the Wall Street Journal that said Iran is working to undercut Trump in presidential election, U.S. spy agencies say. They say that they've observed Tehran working to influence the presidential election, probably because Iranian leaders want to avoid increased tensions with the U.S., an official with the Office of Director of National Intelligence said during a press briefing. So we've been talking about this, and we saw people very interested in it. But one of the biggest problems with this story is that it's not everywhere. Yeah, at this point, you'd think with how much the Russia hoax was rammed on everyone that this would be something hitting wall-to-wall coverage.
This is a confirmed report from our own intelligence.
That's right. And so as we did more digging, as we went with the reporting from the Wall Street Journal, later in the day, we saw that CNN and Washington Post had very similar reporting, but once again, not wall-to-wall coverage like you'd expect on a story this big. But this is the document from the ODNI. That's an unclassified document, and it talks about the tactics of foreign interference in the election. Talks about foreign actors continue to rely on witting and unwitting Americans to seed, promote, and add credibility to narratives that serve the foreign actors' interests. These foreign actors seek to take advantage of these Americans to spread messaging through their channels and engagements. And there's other issues at play here, and we'll get into that in the next segment. But it talks about Iran continuing efforts to fuel distrust in U.S. political institutions and their propaganda mills and online personas, a vast web of them, to spread disinformation and have notably been active in exacerbating tensions over the Israel-Gaza conflict.
Here's what we saw yesterday, which I think is fascinating right now. We saw our numbers spike because people said, what is this? What are they talking about? I've never heard about this. Which means, by the way, there's some smart people who work at these networks. They know what their audience wants to see. We do too. And guess what? We knew this was a topic that you would want to see. But for some reason, the mainstream media decided you don't need to see this. You don't need to be confronted with this truth. And that is why it's so important for us to be on YouTube, to be on Rumble, to be over 400,000 strong on YouTube, to be over 200,000 strong on Rumble, millions on Facebook, to make sure we are active on X, on all platforms, to make sure voices like ours, which, by the way, represent you more than most mainstream media ever will. We have to make sure we're there. So I encourage you right now, there's two options here. If you're brand new or you just haven't engaged in the way you feel like you could, I'm going to ask you to subscribe if you're watching on one of those video platforms. You're on YouTube or Rumble, be a part of this community. We do this show each and every day, Monday to Friday, from noon to 1 Eastern, but we post content continually all day long. Be a part of it. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that thumbs up or that like button if you are watching right now. And I'm going to ask you in the comments to always tell me where you're coming in from. So if you got no comment, you don't know what to say, I know sometimes it can be awkward. We want to make sure your voice is heard. We want to make sure we're also knowing where people are interacting from. So just put in, hey, I'm watching, hey, Logan, I'm watching from wherever it is, Atlanta, Georgia. Let us know where you're watching. We appreciate that. As always, if you can support the work of the ACLJ, go to aclj.org, because not only just getting more eyeballs on this, we have to be able to produce this content. We can't do that without you. So right now, keep us in the fight. Be a part of the conversation. Be a part of our media influence. Get the stories that matter to you on the front page, if you will, of people's social media platforms. We can't do that without you. So go to aclj.org. And again, if you're brand new or you haven't yet, just hit that subscribe button or that follow button. Be a part of this broadcast each and every day. We'll be right back.
Another major assassination, this of a top Hezbollah commander in Lebanon.
In a move almost unheard of, the Israeli military claimed responsibility for the strike and named its target.
Fuad Shukur, also known as Said Muhsin, Hezbollah's most senior military commander and the head of its strategic unit,
who was responsible for killing 12 children in a rocket attack on a soccer field over the weekend.
Israel's top military spokesman spoke about the strike in Beirut against Hezbollah's top military commander.
Hezbollah's ongoing aggression and brutal attacks are dragging the people of Lebanon and the entire Middle East into a wider escalation. While we prefer to resolve hostilities without a wider war, the IDF is fully prepared for any scenario.
Israeli forces across the country remain on high alert, and today there is a notice to airmen closing the airspace of northern Israel in anticipation and concern about the possibility of renewed rocket and missile fire from southern Lebanon.
What type of response will Hezbollah provide? Where will they fire? Which type of weapons will they use? And then, of course, the second, third, and fourth, and fifth layer of responses that the IDF has ready to Hezbollah's responses.
Hezbollah insists it won't stop its attacks until there's a ceasefire in Gaza between Israel and Hamas.
And this morning, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said an all-out war in the region is still not what he called inevitable. But following Israel's attack in Beirut and the assassination in Tehran, that may be wishful thinking, Errol, thinking that Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran will now have to respond.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We have a special guest joining us. Before we do that, I want to pose this question to you. If you want to give us a call, 1-800-684-3110. We were talking in the break. Interesting conversation point. Why is it that we have heard already from Vice President Harris, from Kamala Harris, but not from President Biden? Does this indicate, do you think, that she is working as sort of a not-so-shadow president at this point? What do you think? 1-800-684-3110, again, with that statement from Vice President Harris, as if she's the president, but nothing from Joe Biden. 1-800-684-3110. Jordan.
Logan, I mean, that is very interesting. I do want to hear people have to think about that. Give us a call at 1-800-684-3110. We're going to open up all the lines now so that in our final segment of the broadcast, we can take calls from all of you at 1-800-684-3110. We have a very special guest joining us now, the former Israeli ambassador to the UN, who is also the current incoming Israeli ambassador to the UN, who will be seated in that place in August. That is Ambassador Danon of Israel joining us now. And Ambassador Danon, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast today. My first question to you, I think a lot of Americans and a lot of our viewers of this broadcast and listeners of the broadcast would like to kind of know, is the Israeli perspective of both the elimination of the Hezbollah leader in Beirut and the elimination of Hamas's political leader, Ismail Haniyeh.
Well, thank you for having me again, Jordan. It's always a pleasure discussing with you the issues in the Middle East. You know, we took responsibility to the attack against the leader of Hezbollah, a notorious terrorist that is responsible for the killing of many Americans and many Israelis for decades. It was an important message to Hezbollah after they fired and killed 12 innocent kids who were playing soccer over the weekend. And I think it was the right response, and we'll continue to do whatever is necessary to make sure that our civilians can play soccer, can have a normal life in the northern part of Israel. Regarding to the attack in Iran, Israel, we haven't taken responsibility. From foreign reports, we learned that it was an attack that was originated in Iran against a notorious terrorist as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Ambassador Danon, because these are happening so quickly back together. I think you did make an interesting point. We've been making it clear through the broadcast. Israel has taken responsibility for what has happened inside Beirut with that surgical strike on a Hezbollah commander. There's not been responsibility taken by any nation on the killing of Ismail Haniyeh and inside Tehran. He was there for the inauguration of the new Iranian president. Interesting point, though, just to point out to everybody, is that inside Iran, where you've got this terror-led state, they don't have the security apparatus to even keep their own terrorist friends safe. I want to go to you on this, Ambassador Danon, as well, because I think the American people do need some education on this. We're hearing a lot about, by Israel taking out this Hezbollah commander, who, by the way, the U.S. also had a multi-million-dollar bounty on because of his role in killing U.S. Marines in the 1987 Beirut the barrack bombing attacks, is that somehow because of Israel's reaction to being fired on and its citizens being killed by Hezbollah, a lot of young people being killed, that Israel is starting, another major conflict instead of focusing in on who the actual bad guys are in this situation.
Indeed, and you mentioned the attack on the Marine Corps in Beirut. Think about how many terror attacks this individual planned over the years. We're talking almost 40 years that he's involved in terrorism, and that's unfortunate because today Lebanon is in the hands of Iran. Hezbollah took over that country, and I'm saying it very clearly that the Lebanese government should be responsible for what's happening in Lebanon, because we will not continue to sit idly by when rockets are flying from Lebanon into Israel.
We know this is a critical time for Israel. We have an office there. We've worked closely with you, Ambassador Danon, in many different ways and in different stages of your career as well. And I think it's time that Israel does have you back at the United Nations, because just to kind of explain to people, what is it like to be the ambassador of the country most sanctioned by the world, but yet also a top U.S. ally at the United Nations?
Well, I can tell you it's challenging, and I chose to come back because I understand that we are now in a crucial time for the history of the Jewish people. We read in the Bible about times of crisis and war, but we are now facing a war. We are being attacked from all fronts, from Iran, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and it reminds us of biblical times. So I think now it's time for courage. It's very hard to be the ambassador because most of the day you are by yourself, facing the lies and the hypocrisy at the halls of the UN. But I know we have many supporters, outside of the UN, Christians and Jews who stand with us, pray for us. So I know that, most of the day I stand by myself against evil, but I know I represent millions of followers and supporters who stand with the Jewish people today.
That's so important for our listeners to hear, too, is the importance of their support for Israel, Ambassador Danon, that you really do, and Israel really values that support, especially inside the United States. So when we see any of those cracks start to form, whether it's in the Christian community, whether it's in certain political communities inside the United States, I think it's important that we all go back and give everybody some education. And people on this broadcast are also good at going and then giving people that are listening, getting their friends educated about who is right and who is wrong, because we don't need to see college kids in America flying the flags of Hamas and flying the flags of Hezbollah.
And that's exactly what we need. What you're doing on the show and what your family and your father is involved for so many years, it's essential for moral clarity and to understand that we have 115 hostages in the hands of Hamas. And everybody is pushing Israel for a ceasefire, but I don't hear them calling for the release of the hostages. And I can tell you, we will not forget them. I met the families and I told them I will go to the UN. I will speak on behalf of your daughters and children that were abducted from their homes, and we will not sit until we bring them back home.
You know, Logan and Will, I wanted to check with you guys too, if you had a question for Ambassador Danon, because it really is an honor to have him. He's both been the former ambassador to the UN for the State of Israel, and he is coming back in August to retake that position. So we'll be able to work with him again at that level at the United Nations. Logan, Will?
I just wanted to thank him, obviously, for doing this and coming back and being a part of our broadcast as well. As you said, we've been on the front lines of this from a media standpoint, from a legal standpoint, the entire time, for decades. Yeah. And it has been such a great privilege to work with them. And I feel like having someone that we can contact, and that's why it's important even here at the ACLJ that we have these relationships built. When you hear from people like him, when you know that when you're putting your money, when you're supporting the organization, you know that's going to making a huge impact.
I also wanted to ask you, Ambassador Danon, as we see in some of the media here in the United States that's not as friendly to Israel as they should be, they report that Haniyeh, who was the political leader of Hamas, they try to paint him as more of a moderate and not necessarily a terrorist, but that isn't the case. And I just want to get your take on trying to paint him as a moderate, if that's the reality of what we look at.
Well, he was a terrorist, from day one. He was involved in planning terror attacks. He switched position recently, and he moved out from Gaza to become the one who is actually funding terror. But once he moved out, he didn't change the ideology. On the contrary, he continued to support terror and to fund terror through different ways. So no one can call him a martyr. He is a radical terrorist.
All right. Well, thank you so. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah. No, I just want to thank Ambassador Danon for joining us. We are excited. Of course, we continue to work with you inside and outside your role at the United Nations, but we're going to be excited to have you back at the United Nations at a critical time for Israel, both at the UN and in the United States of America. So playing a dual role there. We're excited to work with you as we are right now. Ambassador Danon, thanks for joining us. And Logan, critical time to support the work of the ACLJ today.
If you like this broadcast, if you like the legal work we do, if you like any of the media stuff you get from the ACLJ, whether that's on YouTube, Rumble, all of that is being made by an incredible team, and we can't do it without you. This is how you support the ACLJ with a one-time or ACLJ champion donation. You can either become a champion, which is someone who supports the ACLJ on a monthly recurring basis, or just a single one-time donation. And maybe you've already given this month. We appreciate it. Doesn't mean you can't give again. Give again right now, aclj.org. Again, wrapping up our Life and Liberty Drive. I do want to say we got about 3 lines open right now. Give us a call, 1-800-684-3110. It'll be a short wait. I'm only take as many calls as I can in the next segment. We're going to pose that question. Why is it that we've heard from Vice President Harris, but we haven't heard from President Biden? Is she essentially functioning now as the president? Is that what they're trying to convey? I want to hear from you. 1-800-684-3110. 1-800-684-3110. We'll be right back. The most important voice, yours.
Vice President Harris backing President Biden's calls for sweeping changes to the Supreme Court Monday. Her campaign saying its fairness has been called into question. That is why President Biden and I are calling on Congress to pass important reforms.
President Biden says he's pushing for a constitutional amendment stating any former president could be prosecuted for crimes while in office.
Biden also wants to replace lifetime tenure for the justices with 18-year term limits, as well as an enforceable, binding ethics code for the 9 justices.
When you have that level of congressional meddling over a co-equal branch of government set up by our Constitution, then you no longer have 3 separate branches. You have Congress overseeing the judiciary. That is, you just have a super Congress.
House Speaker Mike Johnson posting on X, quote, "This dangerous gambit of the Biden-Harris administration is dead on arrival in the House."
Will it be better for America if Congress has direct oversight over the Supreme Court? No, that'll obviously make it more political.
What is going on is Biden is trying to transform the United States Supreme Court because he and his liberal allies disagree with their decisions. That's the bottom line of what's going on here.
They don't like the decisions that this court has made, and so they're going to change the court the same way they don't like the decision that their Democrat nominating process went through. So they changed that process to get Vice President Harris to be their nominee.
The left and the Democrats are still bruising and brooding over the reversal of Roe versus Wade, and this is their way of making this part of the political conversation in the next 3 months during the presidential election campaign.
This just smacks of arrogance, in my view. You don't like a decision, so you're going to change the court.
The Supreme Court is not a toy or something to be played with. And so approaching these proposals in the spirit of political opportunism is exactly the wrong way to go.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Tulsi Gabbard's joining us. Will, this is such a really busy time, and we have moments like this when the Supreme Court could be altered. You have Harris coming in with some strong polls, and now potentially a vice presidential candidate that could help that as well. It's just a busy time.
That's right. And Tulsi, what we're seeing from the media currently is definitely a honeymoon period that they're giving the vice president. You can tell a lot on the liberal media is very relieved that it is not Joe Biden running anymore. But we're also seeing them start to cover for the failures as Vice President Harris was given that task of trying to mitigate the issues at the southern border, where many of the outlets called her the border czar early on, as many of us did, because that was what seemed to be the role that was given to her, are now even clawing that back and be like, no, she was never the border czar. What's your take on the way the media is covering for Vice President Harris now as she is the presumptive nominee?
Yeah, it's not a surprise to see how they're reacting. As you pointed out, once they got the signal that Biden was not going to be the preferred choice of the Washington elite, they all started, piling up against him. And it was almost an overnight switch in their narrative of going from defending him and trying to somehow convey that he was quite capable of being our president, commander-in-chief, to almost overnight, especially after that debate with Donald Trump, saying, well, no, he is incapable. They were exposed. And I think that we're seeing the very same thing happen with Kamala Harris, is they have a very clear objective, and it is the Democrat elite, the administrative state, the people who have been making decisions behind the scenes for the entire Biden-Harris administration, continuing to work with their allies and partners in the propaganda media and big tech to tell the story that they want us as voters to believe. They don't care if it's rooted in facts or truth or anything at all. So, we have to be very clear-eyed, and this is something that I hope that the Trump administration focuses on is simply comparing the facts of the record of the Biden-Harris administration versus President Trump's record in his 4 years in office. There is such a huge contrast there of failures in the Biden-Harris administration and successes in the Trump administration around issues that voters really, truly care about. Bread and butter issues like the economy, border security, states, communities, domestic policy, foreign policy, protecting our children. The list goes on. And I believe that as long as facts continue to rise to the forefront in spite of this cover-up job that the mainstream propaganda media are doing now, and they're going to continue. This is not going to change. Kamala Harris is their horse, and they're going to do all they can to get her across that finish line. So it's going to require a whole lot of people reminding voters of the truth, of the negative consequences we've been experiencing in our country ever since the Biden-Harris administration took office.
Tulsi, that's one of the things that we've been talking about here internally, and even reading people's comments. They're getting a little lost. Like when we talk about the fact that polls are shifting, and we've seen some polling for Harris rise significantly, or at least even out. There's commentary going, how would you even give this any credit? Why are you talking about this? Or even, like you said, Mike, like, hey, let's maybe focus on one of the interesting parts about this, which is she has a pretty significant record in terms of she was part of this administration the last 4 years, all of her time in California. There's a lot you could actually talk about if we start focusing on that, like you said, the important issues that actually matter that shouldn't really then impact the polls in some ways, because it's a clear who you would support or who you wouldn't support. But if you get lost in these personal attacks, if you get lost in these, like I said, almost the meme culture of it, it starts to become a concern because you have a lot of people who will be turned off by that. Either they're not going to vote or they don't understand the real ramifications here of what could be a Harris presidency.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, ultimately, when you really look at it, people are, most people, I would say, are concerned about, providing for their families. They're concerned about, how tough it is to be able to afford the things that you need to, both support yourself and those that you love and care about. They're concerned about the increasing pressures from millions of illegal immigrants crossing our borders. They're concerned about, the prospect and the increased likelihood of nuclear war. These are all very real things that transcend, Democrats versus Republicans. And when they see politicians who resort to kind of the, who are distracted away from these issues.
Right.
This is when they tune it out and they're like, okay, well, you obviously don't care about us and what I care about, so I don't know why I should listen to you anymore.
Tulsi, one other thing that we saw yesterday was President Biden put out what he proposes are reforms to a co-equal branch of government, the Supreme Court. It's concerning to us as we've seen those on the left attack the Supreme Court over and over again. But now that during this time, while Kamala Harris is getting such praise and all these laurels from the media, that Biden is taking it upon himself to attack a co-equal branch of government and try to change the way they operate. What are your thoughts on this as we head into this election season, that the Democrats are concerned and fixated on adjusting a constitutionally co-equal branch of government?
This really, and you've had so many great speakers, and you guys have been raising some very focused and valid concerns about what President Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democrats are pushing. Take it as a layer deeper, and this is one of the main reasons why I left the Democratic Party. I talk about this in my book, For Love of Country. Is this is what happens when you have a party that doesn't care about the Constitution. And they really believe that they are the authority in this country that is more powerful and more important than the Constitution, our foundational principles in our country. So, of course, they believe that they should be able to dictate the rules of the Supreme Court, that they should be able to dictate and have power over what the Constitution mandates is a co-equal branch of government. Obviously, the president gets to nominate judges. The U.S. Senate has a role. The other co-equal branch, the legislative branch, has a role in confirming or denying those nominees to serve in that third branch of government in our court systems. And what they're doing is basically saying, hey, we don't like the court, that the decisions that the court is making now, so we want to remake the whole thing until we have the ability to control it. It's about control and power over freedom, Constitution, and liberty. And that is what makes them so dangerous and why we cannot allow them to continue to remain in power.
Thank you so much for joining us, Tulsi. We always appreciate your feedback and your thoughts, and I know our audience does as well. So obviously, thank you for joining us. Pick up Tulsi's book, For Love of Country. It's available wherever you get your books, or on Amazon. You can find it there. I encourage everyone to do that. New York Times bestseller. So it's very good. Take a look at it. Thanks, Tulsi. I did want to take a moment as we head into the last segment or last minute of this segment to tell you about our Life and Liberty Drive. Kimberly August is here. Back to school's happening. Our Life and Liberty Drive. Be a part of it right now. Your donations are critical if we're going to fight for your constitutional freedoms, defend Israel, and protect life and religious freedom. I want you to have your gifts doubled today. Every donation made is doubled. We fight for our offices around the globe, whether that's in America, whether that's in Israel, wherever we are. You're going to hear a lot more about what we're doing in Israel. But it's not just our legal team. Your gifts support this broadcast. If you like what we do here, and our media team needs your support as well. They bring you up-to-the-minute news and, of course, opinions and thoughts. We can't do it without you. So right now, all gifts are doubled. 10 becomes 20, 20 becomes 40, so on and so on. Go to ACLJ.org. Have your tax-deductible gift doubled now. We are making some headway. Some momentum is happening right now. We're still behind. Do it now. Stay tuned. If you don't get us on your local network, find us live every day, noon Eastern, on all your favorite social media platforms at ACLJ.org.